So I'm Kendrick Lusk. I teach social studies at Burgess High School.
So my name is William Vega. I teach, as of right now, I teach yearbook and what's called digital design, but I'm basically a journalism teacher at Franklin High School.
My name is Sarah Porter. I teach at Trans Mountain Early College High School. I teach business information management, journalism, money matters, and yearbook. And I was 16 years old on September 11th, 2001.
I was 10, about to be 11 years old, right when 9/11 happened.
September 11, I was 2001, so I would have been 26 years old.
Prior to 9/11, my typical day was honestly, I remember I would always wake up, and at the time I would always have breakfast. I don't really do that anymore, but I remember I always have breakfast, and my mom would always take me to school.
Typical day as a lieutenant, I was in charge of 33 soldiers, and we would do PT 5 days a week. My soldiers, I was a military police, so we did law enforcement, so we provided law enforcement on the installation. I was assigned at Fort Hood, Texas at the time.
A typical day for me before September 11th was pretty typical for a lot of our students nowadays. I would wake up, go to orchestra practice, and then go about my day as a junior in high school. The morning of September 11th, I had to go into the orchestra room early. I was the librarian, and I had to make some copies of music to prepare for the day. And I was up early making my bed, and I had a little bitty TV in my room, and I had the news on it while I was making my bed, and I saw that there was breaking news that a plane had hit the World Trade Center in New York City. And so I left my room and went out into the family room where my mother was and put on the news out there and was watching it with my mother when we saw the second plane hit the other tower. So we watched that for a minute, and then I realized I still needed to head to school. I was so engrossed in what was going on and wondering how could an accident like this happen twice. And then I got into my car, and there was news on in the car as well as I was driving to school. And the news there was that there was smoke coming from the Pentagon at that point. So it had become apparent that we were under attack. It was not a terrible accident. When I got into the orchestra room, there was a bass sectional going on, and there were several bass players there with the orchestra director. And I told them that we were under attack. And so our orchestra class didn't have a TV in it, so we went across the hall to the theater. This was at Franklin High School at the time. And so we went into the theater and watched on the TVs there, and then that's how we spent that period. Most of the day, teachers allowed us to watch the news and keep updated on what was going on. I think they were curious too. As an adult now, from their perspective, I would want to know. I was particularly concerned about my dad, who had retired from the military about 10 years prior. And so I did call him at one point and expressed my concern that he was going to be recalled into the military if we were going to end up going to war. And he told me that younger men were going to fight this war, and that is what ended up happening over the course of the last 20 years.
Little did I know that day would probably change the trajectory of my whole career. That day, I remember it very vividly because we were getting ready to go to another installation for training. We were getting our paperwork ready, and we were just watching news, and that's when it happened. And as an MP, all my friends who were still at Fort Hood, the EPICON level had elevated, and they had to lock down all the installations. You had to increase manning, so all those guys who would get to go to the field to do their other missions, everybody's mission was to provide security installation because obviously the Pentagon was attacked. I had mentors who were working at the Pentagon at the time, so everything had changed to include how we got on installation, how we got off installation, to having enough military dog teams at the gates in the event that there was another bomb threat, and it changed everything.
I remember waking up, and my mom was just watching TV. And she's just watching TV, but I don't even think to look up at the TV, we had one in our kitchen, and I didn't even think to look up at the TV. I just said, I didn't think much of it at all, but my mom was just very, 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 very quiet. We're driving to school, and I remember we're about 2 blocks away from our house, and my mom turns down the radio and goes, "Do you know what's going on right now?" And I said, "No," and she goes, "The World Trade Centers were just hit by airplanes." And in my head, all I'm thinking of is I don't know what the trade centers are. I'm 10 years old. I really hadn't learned about any of this at all, and I'm sure maybe a teacher had mentioned it, but I didn't think much of it because it's not like the Empire State Building or the Statue of Liberty, that for sure when you're a 10-year-old in New York, but you don't know about the Trade Center. So in my head, I'm thinking the El Paso Convention Center, or I'm thinking like an outdoor festival and like a plane crashed. And so I'm like, okay, a lot of people probably died, but I don't really understand what's going on with what my mom says. And when she says like the building fell, because by this time the first building had fallen before I had gone to school, and she told me it fell, and I said I just thought of just like the convention center, like something not super tall, but just something like that. So I didn't think much of it, but yeah, she told me that, and that's just what's in my head the whole time. And I just remember going into class, and for some reason I remember only her sitting there, like no one else. Usually other students were there. I was never the first one there, but I just remember her sitting this far away from the TV, like the distance between you and I. And then when I see the footage, then I'm like, oh, I still didn't know what the World Trade Center was, but at least now I'm like, oh, that was a very tall building that fell. And then that's when it started to like click, like, oh, that's what's happening. And so my mom explained it, but then my teacher gave me the visual, and I was like, oh, okay, now that makes sense.
In March 2002, President George Bush came to El Paso and gave a speech, and the Franklin High School Orchestra was invited to play the national anthem upon his arrival. As a 16-year-old, I honestly got the feel for what he was saying, but didn't hang on every word. I was more in awe of the power in the room. I do remember the feeling of the day was one of motivation and inspiration, and that we were not going to let this event destroy the American way of life.
But it kind of grew me up, and it was sobering to get the phone call, hey, guess what, we're going to deploy, and we're going to go on 6 months initially. George Bush said, yeah, we're going to go on 6 months, and they extended to another 6 months. And then like, wow, okay, here we are, and having a correspond with your family members and your friends via internet and mail, and not eating regular food for a year. It was hard, but 140-degree temps every day, mosquitoes, and so it was daunting. But it was one of those things where it changes you. And it sucked, and it wasn't really a positive experience. But I can go back, and now as an educator, I've had some difficulties. So I've been through it, and sometimes, you have to be the person in the room who've experienced things, to be the calm, but demeanor, and having a cool head, and understanding that, everything is not as bad as it seems.
I think now, especially as a teacher, with none of my students being born during it, every year I've always done a lesson on 9/11. As my years would progress, I was always like, how old were you when you were at 9/11? And so I started in 2012, and so, at the time it was like, oh, I was, 6, 7 years old. And then of course it started getting younger and younger and younger, and now we're at the point where no one was born during 9/11. Talking about 9/11 now, I think it's good to talk about the historical events. What I always tell kids for sure, as I said, I'll tell them that, maybe I'll get this number wrong because I have to think about it, but I remember one of my professors saying that we've only been attacked on U.S. land, I believe it was just like 3 times: Pearl Harbor, the Civil War, and 9/11. And those are the only 3 times that we've been attacked on American soil. And so that's a big deal. I feel like that's a really, 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 really big deal.
It is another day for them. I asked a question. So who knows what 9/11 is? And, oh, mister, that's what you call when, the bad guys or something bad happens, you're in an accident. I said, yes. Then I go around the room. Oh, yeah, mister, that was the terrorist attacks. And then I'll go into, and I explain it to them, what they call Patriot Day. And I explain to them the things that happened before and now. And then and just bring it up in discussion, and just to get them to think, about that. And yeah, like they weren't born. And I have to bring that to the forefront, because a lot of things they just don't know. And I have to at least share that with them so they know. And especially as a service member, and as a person who's law enforcement, and as a person who majored and studied social sciences and stuff, to pass that off, because I figure like if I don't share it, who's gonna share that with them? Who better to do that than me? Because I lived it before, during, and after, so I can speak about it and at least give them stuff to study, and at least give them some sense of, okay, it's more the life than just making money. You have other people who sacrificed a lot on that day, and they wake up like you and I. People went to school like you and I, and then everything changed. So just to get them to think about that, not so much be, okay, it's about me, but what about everyone else? And then go over the key things that occurred, the things that how life was before, and how life is now as a result of that. So That's something that I think I can do a pretty good job at, and just to spark some interest, to get them involved in public service and get them involved in, other things that they could do. Everybody has a calling, and some of us aren't gonna be rich. I'm a school teacher, I'm a veteran. I will never be a millionaire, but I've served, and I think I've had a good life and a noble life. So that's important, just to get them to think about other things besides just, I want to get out and I want to make money. So
for me, it's important for them to learn about September 11th because so many adults remember it still, and even somewhat younger adults remember it, and the students hear about it, and I want them to know what happened. I think that those of us that lived through it assume people have a memory of it, and the students that are in high school now were born in 2007, around there, so it was long before them, and they don't have a memory of it. So for them to hear the stories of what it was like for people that they've gotten to know well as their teacher, it sounds different than just reading it out of a book.
But since as a journalism teacher, what I actually like the students to know is I like to know how journalists handle it. There was one journalist who actually wasn't even on duty, believe it or not, and that he was like on a walk with his wife, and he was far, because he said he was able to see all of the skyline, and he said that he was walking with his wife, and then all of a sudden he saw smoke coming out of one of them, and he looked at his wife and he's like, "I'm sorry, I gotta go." So he kissed her goodbye and obviously never came back. And the museum even has his press credentials and all that, because he got obviously very, very close to the building, and then it eventually collapsed on him. But that's what I like to tell the kids about, is I always tell them, the way I started off is I say the way that I see it is that there were 3 people for sure who were, when everything shut down during 9/11, because even throughout the nation a lot of stuff shut down, there was 3 people who kept going, and it was government officials, first responders, and then of course the journalists. And people don't think about journalists doing that, but it's journalists were there, and like I said, even one of them unfortunately even lost their lives. And I tell them that as a journalist, of course I'm not going to tell the kids to run towards danger as a teenager, but if they want to eventually get into journalism, it's something they got to keep in mind, that just because you're in there's dangerous stuff, sometimes you got to go. For me, I guess I'd turn it into a teaching experience. Like I said, I try not to instill fear in them, to make it seem like, oh, you got to be on your toes and all this kind of stuff at all times. I really don't try to get my kids to do that, but I do tell them that as journalists, you got to be ready.
Be good to each other. And I think after that, there was a lot of sense of pride. I think we're kind of unified. I think right now we have a lot of polarization, and everybody has their own thoughts on things. But just to get them to think about, the collective good of my personal freedoms. I mean, what can I do to help everyone and it's not about me, it's about how can we help each other. And I think that day we saw a lot of many different people helping each other, whether regardless of nationality, creed, race, ethnicity, religion. We saw a lot of people pull together and help each other out. And I think sometimes along the way we've kind of lost that, and I think we need to bring that back so they can think about, it's not about me, it's about it's about us, it's about the whole team. Thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about me, do my part as an educator, ensure that our youth have a chance to understand the world better than they knew it before they come into my classroom. So they're left, relevance of things, and try to make those connections to what happened in the past or what can happen in the future, and just to be understanding of the situation around them, and just thank for the opportunity.
But I think the biggest thing that I want people that I think people should get from it is how it's changed a lot of generations. And I think especially my generation, from that little gap of let's just say 10 to 13-year-olds, it changed us a lot. Like I said, I can't even remember what an airport looked like before that. And then for some people, they don't even fly until they're teenagers. And so they probably have never ever known what an airport looked like before. It was crazy. And so I think it's just, I guess what I want people to understand is how our generation grew up with, and how it's just affected us a lot even to this day.
When I cover the lessons about September 11th, I want my students to know why we have a moment of silence every day. That started because the moment of silence was to reflect on the war on terror and to think about the soldiers that were fighting for our freedom and our continued way of life. And we take that moment every day, and I want them to know where it came from and to help motivate them to think about those things even now, and to take that moment of reflection and moment of silence every day and really consider things just for a few seconds.